Today's daf is daf Nun Gimel. And we'll start here on the bottom of daf Nun Beis Omid Beis. Boy Rami Bar Chama, which is approximately 8 lines up from the bottom of Nun Beis Omid Beis. Now, in the Mishnah back on daf Mem Tes Omid Beis, we said that we have something called Tumas Rova Hakav, not Somos, and it's not a Tuma which is Soser Minyan Nazirus, and the Nazir is not Megalecha. So that's called Tumas Rova Kav Atzomos. And even though it is Metami B'Oel, but nevertheless, it's not Nazir Megalecha unless it's Chatzi Kav. Rova Kav is not enough. However, excuse me, Rami Bar Chama raises the possibility that with regard to Shidra and Gilgolis, which is the spine and the skull, these are more chamur, and therefore Rova Atzomos min Shidra Gilgolis Mai. Is it possible, asks Rami Bar Chama, that in the cases of Shidra and Gilgolis, we will be soser the Nazirus, and the Nazir will be Mgaleach Sarosov even on a Rova Kav Atzomos. And the Gemara explains the suffix. Ki Katani, when the Mishnah says that a Nazir is only Mgaleach on Chatzi Kav Atzomos, that's only Hecha De'ika Mishar Evarov. If we're talking about other Evarim, other than the Shidra and the Gilgolas, which are more Chamor, then halacha is that a Nazir is not Soser Minyano unless there's a shear of Chatzi Kav Atzomos. Avol min Shidra v'Gilgolas techamiri. The din, the status of Shidra and Gilgolas is more Chamor. And this we know from the fact that if they are Shlemim, then they are Metame even B'Kolshu. For example, in the case of a Nefel, a preemie that was born, a stillborn, what we call a miscarriage, if there's a Shidra Gilgolas of the Nefel that's complete, then it doesn't matter what the size of the Shidra or the Gilgolas is. It's even V'Kolshu, it's Metame. So we see that the Torah is more machmir with regard to Shidra and Gilgolas, so maybe the Torah would be machmir in the case of Giluach of a Nazir, that afilu Rova Atzomos, even in a case of Rova Atzomos, Rova Kav Atzomos, which is not usually with regard to other Evarim enough for the Nazir to Megaleach. Rova is not enough, we need a Chatzi Kav Atzomos. But here, in the case of Gilgolas and Shidra, even a Rova Atzomos might be so. So Dimaloshna, well, maybe there's no difference between the two. Omar Rava Toshma. Rava is going to be medayek from a Mishnah. And it says the following, that a Nazir is soser his Nazirus if he was nitma al yidei Shidra hashidra v'Gilgolis. Ve'is al kedaitach. If Rabbi Bar Chama was right in one of his studies, named that Rova Atzomos, the Osim in Shidra Gilgolas Chamir, and therefore the Nazir would be Megalech even on Rova Atzomos in the cases of Shidra or Gilgolas, is listening al Rova Atzomos Haba min Shidra. The Gemara now is working with the premise that there's no such thing as a complete Shidra and Gilgolas that don't have a shear of Rova Kav Atzomos. So therefore, when we look at the Mishnah in Olos in Perek Beis Mishnah Gimel, then why did the Mishnah mention that the Nazir is Galeach on Tuma of Shidra and Gilgolas Shleiman? If the shear is a Rova Kav, and the Nazir would be Megaleach even on a Rova Kav, then even on segments, chelke atzomos, parts of the bones that come from the skull or from the spinal column, that should be the Chiddush of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah should tell me that the Nazir is Megaleach, not just in the case of Shleimim, but even in the case of a shear of Rov HaKav that's made up of segments, small Chelkei Atzamos from the Shidra and the Gugolos. From the fact that the Mishnah did not mention so, it would seem that there's no din of Shidra and Gugolos in the case of Rov HaKav, that Rov HaKav Atzamos is not mitame for a Nazir to be Megaleach even in the case of Shidra and Gugolos. And now we start the daf for today, and that's daf Nun Gimel. The Gemara says that we don't understand how Rava could deposhate the Sof of Rabbi Bar Chama in that way. Rava hu diamar, it was Rava himself who said, Lo nitzucha el l'shidra v'gugol she'ein b'hem rova atzamos. So Rava himself holds that there is a reality, there is a mitzius of a shidra and a gugoles that don't have a shear of Rov HaKav atzamos. And that would be the case of perhaps a nefa. And therefore, you cannot be poshet from the Mishnah, the suffix of Rami Bar Chama. Because even if a Nazir would be Megaleach on Tumas Rov HaKav atzamos, in the case of Shidra and Gugoles, we would still need the Chiddush of the Mishnah that he's Megaleach even on Tumas Shidra v'Gugolos Shleimim when they don't have a shear of Rov HaKav atzamos. And the Gemara answers, Basa d'Shama Rav Akiva, Rava heard something from Rabbi Akiva, and then he rescinded his original statement. Notice, L'chatchila, Rava held that there's no such reality, there's no such a nimtza as a Shidra Gugolos that don't have a shear of Rov HaKav atzamos. And therefore he thought that we could be poshet the suffix of Rami Bar Chama from the Mishnah. But now he heard something, which we don't know exactly what he heard, from Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva holds that a Shidra Gugolos that don't have a shear of Rov HaKav atzamos, there is such reality. Then Rava rescinded his original statement and he concedes that it's not possible to be poshet the suffix from the Mishnah because we need the Mishnah to tell me that a Nazir is Megalech even on a Shidra Gugolos that don't have a shear of Rov HaKav atzamos. So initially Rava did not understand that there was such a reality that there could be under the heavens a Shidra v'Gugolos she'ein b'hem shear Rov HaKav atzamos. But now from Rabbi Akiva, he understood that there is such a thing. And therefore he would drop the ball on his original proof from the Brisa. And Tosfos says, Lo nisbayer b'divrei Gemara, what's basar d'shami Rabbi Akiva? Did Rabbi Akiva say something that Rava heard to the effect that the Shidra Gugoles she'ein b'hem shear Rov HaKav atzamos? I mean, Rava was many, many centuries, many years after Rabbi Akiva. He was not in the generation of Rabbi Akiva. So Tosfos offers, based on Rishonim, different explanations of the sugya. We'll mention one of them that is based on Rabbeinu Peretz. He holds that the Girsa is that after the proof of Rava from the Mishnah, that a Nazir is not Megaleach al Rov HaKav atzamos of Shidra Gugolos, Omar Mar Ukva, the Girsa should not be Rabbi Akiva, but rather Mar Ukva, Chacha b'Shidra v'Gugolos she'ein b'hem Rova askinon. So it was Mar Ukva who came to reject the proof of Rava from the Mishnah, because there is such a reality as Shidra v'Gugolos she'ein b'hem Rov HaKav atzamos. And that's why the Mishnah had to be, Mashmiah had to teach me that even in that case, the Nazir is Megaleach, but it's still possible that even on a Rov HaKav atzamos from Shidra Gugolos, the Nazir is in fact Megaleach. And now the Gemara is going to try to be poshet the suffix of Rami Bar Chama from the following brisa. Toshma, this was a brisa that we had back on Daf Nun Beis, Amid Beis, with regard to Tumas Oel in Atzamos Hames. Shamai Omer, Etzem Echad min HaShidra min HaGugolos, even if you have only one bone from either the Shidra or the Gilgolos, it's Metame Be'ohel. But again, that's only one bone from the Shidra or from the Gilgolos. Now, the Gemara is of the opinion that since, according to Shammai, even one etzem from the Shidra Gilgolos is Metamis Ba'oel, then even the Chacham who disagree with Shammai, and they hold that there's no Tumas Oel, unless you have a Rova Kavatzamos, but not one etzem, and the Rova Kavatzamos, according to the Chachamim, that a Metami B'Tumas Oel have to be from either Rov Minyan or Rov Binyan, as we discussed in the previous daf. Nevertheless, they concede that there is a Tumah, even in the case of Rova Akav, that come from a Shidra Gilgolos. In other words, it's not logical to distinguish between them. In other words, if Shammai holds that Etzem Achas Min HaShidras Metames, then the Chachamim would hold on the other extreme that even Rova Kav Min HaShidra Eina Metame, that's going from one polar extreme to the other. And therefore, it's more logical to assume that the Rabbanan agree that at least in the case of Rova Kav Min HaShidra, you would have a Tumas Oel in the case of Shidra and Gilgolos. And now we could be poshet the suffix of Rami Bar Chama that even if a Nazir is not Megaleach on Chatzi Kavat Samos, but if the Chatzi Kavat Samos came from the Shidra or the Gilgolos, then the Nazir would in fact be Megaleach on the shear of Rova Kav. The Rosh asks the following kasha: how can we poshet the suffix of Rami Bar Chama from the machlokas between Shammai and Hillel? Rami Bar Chama had a suffix if a Nazir is Megaleach on Tumas Rova Kavatzamos Min HaShidra Gilgolos. Shammai and Hillel are not dealing at all with the dinim of Tiglachas Nazir. They're dealing with the din of Tumas Oel. So what's the proof from Tumas Oel? Now the Gemara thinks that the reasoning of Shammai that an etzem achas min hashidra is metamis be'oel is because he holds that tuma of rova kavat samos of a shidra is metami midaraisa, and therefore he holds that even on one etzem in a shidra there's at least a tuma midrabanan. And even though the Chachamim reject this as far as etzem is concerned, we don't find anywhere that they rejected and disagreed with Shammai with regard to the din of Rova Kav Min HaShidra, that's Metami Doraisa. So since Tumas Rova Kav Min HaShidra is Doraisa, therefore the Nazir should be Megalea. And this is all based on the Rambam, who holds that whenever there's a Tumah Doraisa, then the Nazir Megalea. And the Gemara rejects this. Shani Shammai de Machmir Tfei. We can't prove anything from Shammai for the Chachamim who disagree with Shammai. It's very possible that Shammai is machmir in two different ways. Number one, that a Nazir is Galech on Tumas Rova Kavat Samos. And number two, that even an Etzem Achas Min HaShidra is Metamis B'Oel. Now, as far as the opinion of the Chacham are concerned, it's very possible to say that they rejected both premises and principles of Shammai. And according to the Chachamim's view, not only is there no tumah b'etzem achas min hashidra gugolas, but in addition, even in the case of a Nazir, he's not megalech on tumas rova kavat savos min hashidra min hagugolas. So the Gemara says, okay, so you haven't been able to prove in that direction. Maybe we should prove it in the opposite direction. Adarabba, lifshot minei, taima de Shammai de machmir. Shammai was machmir that a Nazir is megalech on a tomb of rova kavat samos. Hol rabbanon adeika chatzi kavat samos. The rabbanon disagree. Ein a Nazir megalech. A Nazir is not megalech even on atzamos hashidra gilgolas, unless it's a shear of machzis akav. Because if the Chachamim would be machmir and the Nazir is megalech even on rova kavat samos min hashidra gilgolas, they should have said that explicitly. And the Gemara rejects this as well. You can't be posted in that direction as well. Dilma ad kan lo pligi rabbanon alei de shamai. When do the rabbanon reject shamai el bi etzem echad? Only on that first principle of shamai, that a nazir is megaleach even on etzem achas min hashidra, that's mitami b'oel. But as far as the other breakthrough or chumrah, shall we say, of shamai, that a nazir is galeach on tumas rova kav atzamos, aval berova atzamos afilu rabbanim modu, maybe they would actually concede to the shita of Shammai, that even though, again, there's no tumah v'etzem achas min hashidra, but it's possible that a Nazir, according to the Chacham as well, would be megalech on a rova kama tzavos min hashidra u'min hagagolos. They didn't specify that, they didn't say it explicitly, but okay, you can't be poshik the suffix of Rami Barcham from the Chacham. Now, back in the Mishnah, Daf Mem Tesam and Beis, we established that a Nazir is not megaleach if he was nitma, if he came in contact and was contaminated by a rova kavat somos, unless it's a chatzi kav. However, the Mishnah in Olos, in Perek Beis Mishnah Aleph, says that a rova kavat somos is metami b'oel. So why is it that a rova kavat somos is metami b'oel and yet ein hanozir megaleachol? And the Gemara is going to bring three different views amongst the Tanoim in this regard. First, Omer Rabbi Eliezer, Skenim harishonim iktsasim hayu omrim chatzi kavat somos v'chatzi log dam lakol. That if a person is mahil on a chatzi kavat somos or on a chatzi lug of dam in a mess, he becomes tummy, contracts tumas oil. And that has a double meaning. Number one, he's not allowed to eat truma or kodshim. He can't come in contact with truma or kodshim. And it also means that a nazir would be soser minyan naziruso, he'd be galeach saroso. And if he was nitma right before Pesach, he's not allowed to bring the korban Pesach. He's going to have to wait till Pesach Sheni. And all that is a case of chatzi kav atzomos, or chatzi lug dam in ames. Rov atzomos revius dam lo lakol. If he was mile on only a rova kav atzomos or revius of lug dam in ames, there's no tum at all. He's allowed to eat kodesh and truma. And how much more so in the case of a nazir, he's not megalech and sosa yimei naziruso. He would have to bring his korban pesach. And this view disagrees with the Mishnah in Olos that holds that even mahil al rova kovat somos is tameh, as far as truma and kodshim are concerned. So that's one shita. That's the shita of Rabbi Eliezer in the name of the Zkenim Rishon. Now there are other Zkenim. Miktsasam ayu omrim af rova somos revius dam lakol. If a person is even mahil on rova kavat somos or rova lug dam in a mess, he's tummy for all dinim, whether it's eating truma kodshim, whether it's to be soseres nazirus and vimagalech, whether it's to push off the bringing of the korban pesach rishon, he'll have to bring pesach sheni. And this opinion disagrees with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says that a nazir is not soser minyan nazirusa unless he has ohil helhil al chatzi kavatzom, so chatzi log min ames. And now we have a third opinion. Bezdin shalach reim, a later Bezdin Amru, they decided that chatzi kavatzomos for chatzi log dam lakol, if he was mahil on a chatzi kavatzomos chatzi log dam, then all the dinim of tum apply to him, whether it's truma, achilus truma v'isra, achilus truma kodshim, whether it's giluach hanaz, whether it's pesach sheni, he's pushed off to pesach sheni. So that's in the case of chatzi kavatzomos. However, rovatzomos, which means anything less than chatzi kav, urevius dam, anything less than a chatzi log of dam, is l'truma v'kodshim. Now, for the first time, we are encountering a distinction between the subcategories or the repercussions of tumah, the dinim of tumah. On the one hand, if a person is ma'il on a rova kavat samos or a revius yayin, a revius dam, he's only tameh as far as truma kodshim. He's enjoined from eating truma kodshim. So that level of tumah he has contaminated through oil in the case of a rova. But it's not soser as minyan nazirus. And not only that, he'd be allowed to bring the korban pesach. And this opinion, this third view, can be reconciled with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that the Nazir is not megaleach or soser naziruso unless he was mahil on chatzi kavatzam, so chatzi lugdam. And this could actually be squared off with the Mishnah in Olos that holds that a ma'il al rova kavatzamos or rova logdam and hames is tameh, but that's only tumah le'inyan isur achilas truma v'kodshim. So from our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Olos, we derive the conclusion that the halacha is like the bezdin shel achreim, this last third view. Because this bezdin was machriya in the machlokes between this Kedim Rishonim. And on that, the Gemara is not happy. Because michti ein achroa shlishis machras. Normally, when you machriya, you take a middle of the road between two polar extreme opinions. And we're assuming that we will not rely on the third opinion that's machras between the two opinions that disagree. How can you paskin like the bezdin shel achreim when ein hachras shlishis machras? Now, this is a principle that is formulated by the Gemara Psachim Chaf Aleph. Ein hachras shlishis machras. And what does that mean? If the Bezdin Shel Achreim were Talmidim of the Zakenim Arishonim, they were later Bezdin, then we cannot paskin like them against the Deya of their Rabboseim. And we cannot rely on the Bezdin Shel Achreim because all the Zakenim Rishonim hold, they all unanimously held the opinion that we cannot subdivide and distinguish between Tumas Oel in the case of Truma Kodshim on the other hand, on one hand, and Giluach Nazir and Pesach Sheni on the other hand. The only difference is that according to Miktsasam, according to one group, the Shir Hakol is Berovakav, Revius Lug, and according to other Miktsasam, the Shir is Chatzi Kav and Chatzi Lug. Whereas according to the Bezdin of Achreim, we're going to differentiate between Tumas Oel, between Truma and Kodshim on the one hand, and a Rova Kav and Revius Lug is enough to generate an Isur Yechilus Truma. And in contrast, we have the Giluach of Nazir and the Din of Pesach Sheni, where you need a Tum of Chatzi Kav or Chatzi Lug. So that's a Dea Shlishis, and it disagrees with both of the previous deos. So even if you don't assume that we can't paskin like the Talmidim against the Rabboseim, but nevertheless, there's another reason why we can't paskin like the Bezdin Shel Achreim, because they are pitted against both of the first shitos by making this distinction and subdividing Tumah into two categories. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, Bezdin Shel Achreim are not saying this hachra me'atzmam, el mipishmua amru. They were makabel this hachra from their Rabbosa, this middle of the road shita, in which we distinguish between Truma and Kodshim on the one hand, as far as the Yisra Achila, and as far as Giluach and Korban Pesach on the other. And from whence and from whom did they receive this transmission? Mipi Chagai Zcharim Malachi. Now this is interesting. We have a principle called Ein Novi Rashoy Lechadish Davar. And that's Lo B'Shamayim. But Chagai Zcharim Malachi, like all the Nevi'im basically, were also great scholars. And they were part of the tradition of this Masorah. Now, I don't have with me here, because I'm in a place where I don't have Sfarim, a Rambam at the beginning of the Mishnah Torah in his introduction, but if you look that up, I think you'll find Chagei Zchari Malachi on the list of the Masorah. But I'm not sure. It's been a while since I saw the Akdama of the Rambam. So now the Gemara goes back to the Mishnah and is medayik from the Reisha and the Sefer. Al elu an Nazir megaleach. And in the Reisha of the Mishnah, it lists and enumerates those tumos that generate a giluah. And in the Sefer of the Mishnah, we also have, in the opposite direction, in both cases, we have the word elu. Now, the word elu is always a mute. It's like we darshan the Mishnah, like we darshan a pasuk. And the Gemara is going to ask, do we have here a stira between the Reisha and the Sefer through the word elu, as far as the din of Nazir being magalech? Al elu de Reisha, we're going to assume that when it says al elu in the Reisha, these are the tumos which generate giluach of a Nazir. What is the miyut from the word elu? Lema'ute etzem kisiora. That if there's a small etzem, minames, then there's no tumas oil, and therefore there's no din of giluach. Tialmago malmaso in. If the Nazir comes in direct contact with etzem kisaora, that's called tumas maga, or alternatively he carries an etzem saora, then he's megaleh. However, if he was mahil on an etzem kisaora, he's tar, because etzem kisaora is not metami v'tumas oil. And now we jump to the Sefer. Al elu de Sefer. What is the word elu in the Sefer coming to be in mind? As if to say, where is it that there is a din of giluach? Lim'ute even haschuchis. Now, what's schuchis? So there are two interpretations of what the word schuchis means. First, we'll take the shita of Tosfos. And Tosfos says that a schuchis is transparent. It's a transparent stone that juts out from a fence or from a wall, and there's tuba underneath this blita, this even aboletes, and the Nazir now goes by one of these, under one of these even avonim avoltos, but we're not sure if he was mahil ala tuma. So his tumah now, in this case, where we're not sure whether he's mahil ala tuma, is only a tumah d'rabbanan, and it's not soser minyan nazirus, and there's no gilua. Now the Mishnah says chatzi kavat samos, that a nazir who contracted tumah with the tumah of chatzi kavat samos min hames, he is megalech and he soser his nazirus. And here we're going to turn to Daf Nun Gimel Amid Beis.